UK Motor Talk.
Well, hello and welcome back. I'm Mike.
I'm Jim. Apologies if I sound full of cold. It's because I am full of cold.
You can be like that.
And I'm Graham, apparently masquerading as my good lady, because her name's come up on the screen, but there you go. The quirks of Zoom.
And this is UK Motor Talk. F1 then. We're going to kick off with Formula 1.
Are you suspecting I'm going to run out of energy later on in the podcast? So if I peak early with all my knowledge on F1, I can have the rest of the podcast having a kip. How's that?
Sounds like a great idea. So, F1, there are...
I have to edit that out.
F1, there are new rules and regs. What are they, guys? Tell me, what are they? How will the cars differ? What do they look like? What's changed?
Well, I don't think it's an underestimation to say this is probably the biggest shake-up of F1 rules ever, I think. I mean, there's certainly been big changes in the cars in the past, going from front engine to mid-engine, from the skinny bicycle wheels basically they used to run on to proper slicks, but I think a lot of that's come out of innovation rather than rule changes, and we've had big engine changes in the past, turbo hybrid era, which has led to a lot of Mercedes domination up until pretty much the last lap of the last race last season, but I think probably the less said about that the better. But this is a massive shake-up, not just in the way the cars look, but how they'll drive, how they'll race, the cost cap as well to throw into the mix. So, I mean, hopefully overall, one thing it will lead to is a more level playing field. And for whether you're technically minded or care, you can get as much or as little into the rules as you want. The upshot of it should be that they'll be able to follow a lot closer and race a lot better. I mean, we're still looking at heavy cars. I think the weight limit's gone up again this year, and are they getting a bit too heavy to look darty, look flighty, look alive? You look at Fernando Alonso's laps that he did in his mid-2000s Renault last season, and the noise, we need to bring back some of that noise, but just how darty and alive the car looked. It looked responsive, it looked snappy, it looked ready to bite you, it looked like you was on the edge. The current cars that we have, they're big, they're wide, they're heavy. Yes, they're fast. They're the fastest cars we've ever seen by 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds a lap compared to very recent times. But I think it's if something looks fast, then does 10 seconds a lap matter? If it looks far more on the edge and alive, I think that's better. But the aerodynamic rules aimed at reducing the outwash of the cars, dirty air we hear being spoken about a lot. The flick ups and the ends of the wings are designed to keep the airflow much more inboard on the car, and the little flick ups and things around the front wheels, it still retains that open wheel look, but it keeps the air more inside the car, directs it underneath the car. We're going back to ground effect, so again that's less sensitive to following another car, because at the moment you can have a car that's 1.5 to 2.5, 3 seconds a lap quicker, and you just can't get close because so much of your lap time comes out of aerodynamics. It's I'm massively looking forward to it, just for a change, just for a shake-up, if nothing else.
I think it looks like being a very interesting season, particularly the early races as they start to develop these things. I mean, they've been building these cars since March, April last year. The regulations were agreed, I thought, and most people thought at that stage. I understand from some reading I've been doing earlier this evening is, in fact, the regulations have not yet been finalised. Although the book appears to be twice the thickness of last year's, it hasn't gone before the World Motorsports Council yet, so it's not been finalised, and they're still tweaking in some areas, not of the cars themselves, but certainly of the motorsport regulations. There's still discussion about the role and timing of safety cars and some other items. But essentially, if you look at the cars, as you quite rightly say, Jim, they look a bit different, but they don't look hugely different. The obvious thing is that the wheels are much bigger. You've gone from a 13-inch wheel to an 18-inch wheel and tyre. That changes completely, or will change completely, the handling of the cars, because you've got a big stiff sidewall similar to that on a high performance road car. So it is changing things. And the tests that they did just before the end of last season with 2021 cars with the big wheels on, certainly the drivers are reporting that they handle very differently. But it's the stuff you can't really see that I think has made the difference. You refer to the ground effects there. You've got two enormous tunnels underneath the car. So whereas the cars were previously flat floored with very wide floors and those big edges to the floors that stuck out a hell of a long way, that's all gone. So you've got the two tunnels. You've got a much smaller floor area, if you like, with the timber piece under it. But that's reliant upon a modified front wing and a heavily modified rear wing. And as you say, they should be much easier to follow and to overtake, because the wash off the rear wing and off the front wing to some extent has been designed to go much higher in the air. So cars, when they're at that sort of 1 second distance apart, they should be able to creep under any outwash and overtake, hopefully, rather more easily. I'm certainly looking forward to it as a season. I think the changes, as you say, are the biggest we've seen for some time. The only other big changes to come will be, I think, in 26, when the new engine regs come in, and God knows what they're going to be. Lots of speculation, but nothing so far. But certainly not all electric. Everybody seems to be of the view that the hybrid will, in some form or other, persist.
The engine changes, I think most fans, whether they're hardcore, watch every single practice session, every single race and absorb everything they can, or just the casual observer, I think a lot of the engine regulations don't really matter to a lot of people, do they? Because whether it's producing 160 kilowatts or horsepower, or however you want to measure it, through an ERS or an MGUK or an MGUH or an EGBGTZZ or whatever they want to call it, it doesn't really matter.
No.
Does it go like stink, and does it sound good?
The current cars just don't sound in any way like the racing cars of yore. I would hope that they'll be taken on board as they redesign the engine regs to try and make them sound a bit more like racing cars. Your average Scooby-Doo going down the street sounds more interesting.
But I think the environmental image that Formula One wants to portray of being carbon neutral or carbon negative, or certainly reducing its carbon output, I think would probably be better served from the moving of the cars and shipping all the cars and all the teams all the way around the world on occasions, maybe slightly planning the calendar a bit better so they don't head from one side of the planet to the other and then all the way back again. It's, the route they take across the globe isn't always the most direct route, but the 18s, they don't look massively different to me, because we've gone back to wheel covers, which I don't think we've seen since about 2009, 2010.
No, quite so.
So, those seem to hide some of the effect of it. I'm just looking at a mock-up of a 2022 car next to a current car. But I think we've seen a few teams doing mock-ups of what they could do with the wheel covers in terms of LEDs and putting patterns on them, or even displaying information. So I think anything like that makes it look more visually appealing is a good thing. But although you could argue, is the rule shake-up massively needed? Because one thing you tend to get with a rule shake-up is the grid spaces out again. You get it takes a few years after a rule change for all the teams to converge to the same point, which of course we've pretty much done. But we've only converged to that point over a single lap at the moment. Once they get racing, they spread out fairly quickly. So fingers crossed it's closer racing. But I do still kind of want Mercedes to come up with a good car so that friend of the podcast, George Russell, gets a good run at this year. He's finally got the call up to the much coveted Mercedes seat. Bit of a question mark over Lewis, whether he'll be back given the events of the end of last season. My instinct is he will be back, whether he sees out the season or whether he carries on into 2023. I'm not sure, but I think he'll come back and see how he likes the cars. If he's looking at another season where he can take that 8th crown, then I think he'll hang around. Red Bull have got an unchanged lineup of Verstappen and Perez. Ferrari have stuck with Leclerc and Sainz. That partnership seemed to be working well. McLaren have stuck with their lineup. We'll be hoping Ricciardo can carry on his improvement. It was certainly a tricky first year for Ricciardo at McLaren, but fingers crossed he can see what he can do. Alpine have stuck with their lineup as well. AlphaTauri, surprisingly, I think slightly have stuck with their line. I mean, that's not being disparaging to Yuki Tsunoda. I think he said himself last year he was very surprised to be offered a new contract because he crashed so much.
He was better in the second half of the season. He did improve quite a lot.
He did, to be fair. Yeah, he started strong, a bit wobbly in the middle, and seemed to get a bit better at the end. So Aston Martin again, their lineup's unchanged, but towards the lower end of the grid, we've got a bit of a shake-up. Right at the end, Haas are remaining as they were with Schumacher and the other guy. But Williams, they've stuck with Latifi, but Alex Albon is back in racing, all those Red Bull test and development driver or high-speed corner at Silverstone crash recreate or whatever he was doing for Red Bull last year, back in a race seat. So I'm really hoping that he'll do a Pierre Gasly and be able to rebuild himself and show what he can do.
Yeah.
Don't think he was given quite a fair crack of the whip and just not given a chance to build up his confidence against the powerhouse that is Verstappen. But all change at Alfa Romeo, probably the most interesting lineup. Bottas going from Mercedes to Alfa Romeo. He's got a long-term deal there, which you'd always wanted at Mercedes. So again, if he can settle back in and become the Bottas of Williams, or the Bottas that every now and again could show himself to be just as fast, if not faster, than Lewis, that'll be one to watch. Guan Yu Zhou there because he's worth more money than a couple of other countries put together, I would have thought. Whether he's quite got the pedigree to go into F1 and race at the front, I'm not quite too sure. But it gives Bottas a very clear mission for the year, doesn't it? Just absolutely annihilate his teammate and go from there. Because I was a bit disappointed not to see Oscar Piastri in a seat this year. I think his Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 4 career so far has shown him to be absolutely top-notch. So would have been good to see him in a car. Maybe would have been good to see Mick Schumacher take a step up to Alfa Romeo, but it's going to be interesting, whichever way we go.
Well, we haven't got to wait too long now. Then the first tests in Barcelona, just a couple of weeks away, so it'll be interesting to see the cars actually at full chat. So
to summarise then, big spoilers, big rims, and spinners. So we've basically become max power. This is what's happened here,
spinners
isn't it?
and hopefully neons as well. We saw a few team shots last year where they put LED lights under the car just to make them look pretty, but actually I think they should do that in races, especially night races.
It's Midnight Club.
It just looks cool. Yeah. It just looks good.
Whoever's developing this, they're millennials who grew up in the noughties with Midnight Club and Need for Speed, and this is what they're doing. They're putting spinners on the cars, big hoops. If they want to make it exciting, put Space Savers on the back and away we go.
The trend of cars getting bigger and heavier is continuing in Formula One, but I think that's a trend that's been fairly common in cars in general, hasn't it? You know, we saw at our open day that we did what seems like a lifetime ago, but pre-COVID, so it might as well have been. You know, we had a brand new Fiesta next to was it late 70s, early 80s Fiesta?
Yes, 1981.
Was it 1981? There it was. It was older than me. The size difference was remarkable. You wouldn't have thought they were the same model line, just how the cars have got a lot bigger. But something that we were having a look at this week was the giant VW Beetle. I mean, okay, it's giant, but it's not actually far off the scale difference between the Mark 1 Fiesta and the Mark 8.5, 9, whatever Mark we're on now. This was quite a thing, wasn't it? It's huge.
It is. This is very cool. I just want to point this out here. This isn't a bit like where you had the Mini and you get a modern Mini Clubman or Countryman or whatever they want to call it, which is basically the same size as a Zafira or Range Rover or a small truck or something. This is someone who's taken an actual VW Beetle, it's an engine in the back, VW Beetle convertible, and then they've scanned the entire car, very cool, and then enlarged it so it's 140% of its size. This is the kind of passion project which is so ridiculous, but I can really get behind because I really like the geeky detail about this, despite the fact it's been based on a truck or what have you, because it just looks so weirdly out of scale. It's like someone's produced a video game or has made like, I don't know, a model railway or something, but just put a giant sized car and just dropped it in there. Or you know, in GoldenEye, when you had the little cheat where you had the big head and you could run around with the big heads on the N64. Now this is aging.
Just made headshots easier, didn't it?
It did, but it's
anyone who picked Odd Job, you just put in the big head cheat and you went as Trevelyan, and then you were well away because you didn't have to move up or down for a headshot.
just shoot. But this is incredible. Such a cool piece of engineering. The original dials slide away under the dash for the truck that it's based on, which I think is a Dodge Ram. Could be wrong there, but certainly a big American truck, and it's just hilarious. It looks so weird and out of place, but in a brilliant way.
Why 140%? Is that just when on a photocopy the default setting to take you from A4 to A3 is 141%? Was that just why not pick that figure?
Well, he said they wanted to go 150, but it was too big for the road. So 140 kind of makes sense. And they aren't the first people to do it, of course. I think it's in Dubai or the Arab Emirates that someone produced a Willys Jeep, and it's 2 or 3 times the size, absolutely huge, and you could drive it, but obviously not on the road. This thing is pretty cool. I particularly like the fact that people have offered him some serious money for it, and he's just said, no, it amuses me. I made it for me, so that's kind of what it is. You would just look at it, wouldn't you, driving down and go, what on earth has happened to that? And I think what's particularly amusing about it, obviously cars haven't necessarily grown to 140% of their size, but it does go to show, if you scaled up at the original design, it would just look so weird. Like the original Mini, if you imagine that at 140%.
Well, a bit like a modern Mini Countryman.
It would look so odd, wouldn't it? It really would.
No, but I don't think. I'm just looking at a picture of a 1967 Ford Mustang next to the Mustang, in inverted commas, Mach-E. And it's not actually a dissimilar picture to the Beetle next to the 140% Beetle. It's actually quite similar, and we'll pop a link up on this somewhere on the socials website, show notes, delete as applicable. But it's not actually that far out, is it? In terms of proportion and scale, if you look at the height, it's pretty much it. That scaled up Beetle is what Ford would do with the Beetle if they were bringing it out as an SUV today. Which is, I mean, let's face it, the way everything has gone, VW probably will bring out the Beetle as an SUV at some point, won't they?
Oof. Yeah. What do they call it? The Stag Beetle. It's like a Beetle but bigger.
The Beetle. With an extra, they'd put an extra E in it. It'd be a Beetle.
No, that'll be the electric version then, yes.
The iBeetle. The Beetle I. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, I took a photo of the Onion part next to my RS Focus. Both of them being the same type of car, medium-sized family car. In fact, Focus may be a small family car these days. And again, it looked huge by comparison to the Onion. You wouldn't really expect that, but the Onion's actually a little bit narrower than a Fiesta, like 2005 Fiesta. You just wouldn't think it. Cars have definitely got bigger, and that's probably the reason why people don't keep their cars in the garage. They keep all the worthless junk in the garage and keep the cars in the driveway, rather than just laziness or something. They probably don't fit.
My benchmark was always the Golf, because the Mark 1 was small and neat. The 2 was just a little bit bigger. And after the 3, 4, etc., it just got bigger and more gross. And they had to keep putting more power in just to overcome the fact that it was bigger and weighed more and was aerodynamically worthless after about the Mark IV.
I remember the Mark IV being particularly gutless as a GTI. It was 130 horsepower or something, wasn't it? It was quite rubbish.
Yeah, from a 2 litre, and I think the Mark II GTI 16 valve made more power out of a 1.8 than it was 20 years earlier, which was, it never seemed quite right to me.
Bit sad. But this Beetle, anyway, V8 engine underneath, which seems like a great idea to me, even if it's in the wrong end. Why not? A ridiculously loud power. And American trucks sound great, don't they? When you hear them burbling past. One drove past me, I think it was an F-150, the other day on the bypass. I just said, "Do you hear that?" Just as it comes past, it sounds absolutely superb. Was it? Or was it a Dodge? That might have been a Dodge Ram, actually. It was going the other way very quickly. Nevertheless, it sounded amazing. I can understand why you'd want to stick that underneath a giant Beetle with a massive sort of ladder chassis or something to be able to take the weight. Seems like a cracking idea, really. I do like the idea, though, now that you can scan an entire car and make it bigger or smaller. I think I'd go the other way. I think I'd choose something really big and make it a third of the size, just for giggles. A bit like the little car company. We saw them where they'd taken... and we spoke about this before. They took the Tamiya car, we forget which one it might have been, the Hot Shot perhaps, and they've enlarged it so you can drive around in it. It's electric powered. But they also do DB5, for example, and a number of other sort of high-end cars, and they shrink them down so that you could still drive one as an adult or perfect size as a kid. And I like the idea that you can muck about with the size of it, the shape of it, or what have you. And I like the idea that you can scan a car and then maybe you could 3D print it. And I'm reminded of when you used to buy videos and DVDs, and at the beginning they would have the anti-piracy thing saying, you wouldn't steal a handbag, you wouldn't download a car. Just watch me, I would download a car and I would print it off. It's exactly what I would do. I would print off my whatever I wanted, a DB4 Zagato or something similar.
Oh,
Definitely
yes,
would do that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and you could put it on whatever you like, and if we're going to have electric skateboard chassis and all the rest of it, and you can put anything you want on top of it, fine, you can have your people carrier on top of one. I'll take that bit off, thanks, and I'll whack on a DB4 or a DB5 or a Diablo, whatever you fancy.
Not very far from here, there's somebody who's got a VW camper with another VW camper, or the top half of another VW camper, welded on the top, which does look quite bizarre, particularly when you consider that it's the bit with all the windows in that's been welded on the top.
So would that be a V-dubber-dubber?
It's a double-decker.
double-dubber.
Was he made a double-decker or a two-storey camper?
Two-storey camper,
Yeah.
but it certainly looks like a double-decker.
A V-dub
Fantastic.
double-decker. A double V-dubber. I don't know. There must be something there. I like the idea that... I've seen them done as articulated trucks. So they use like the van type at the front, the commercial type, and then use the back half of a VW bus, and then had it pivot. So just below the window line, and it hooked onto the back. So it was articulated, and that looked really cool. I thought that's a very clever,
interesting piece of engineering.
Yeah. The potential for producing whatever you want to produce when you can scale it up or down, print it, make it. I mean, they put together an incredible car which they've made, and it's taken a long time to do that and do the metalwork and everything else for it. I'm not suggesting they printed the car off, but I just like the idea that you can do this and you can model stuff. And we've seen it before. We saw it at Goodwood. A very exciting time, I think. And I don't think it'd be too long before the people that make video game liveries and are like, say, your Forzas of the world could effectively design you a car, print it off, and you could have whatever you wanted. How cool would that be?
Shall we finish up with a whistle-stop tour of other motorsport? It's all quite easy to get too focused on Formula One, which hasn't even started yet. But starting a bit sooner, we've got Season 8. It sounds like it's a bit like Netflix trying to keep up with this. Season 8, Part 1 and Part 2, isn't it? After the writers' strike, but we've got Formula E starting very soon, haven't we? So I'm quite looking forward to watch it. Is it today? Really? It's very soon indeed. Or if you're listening to this podcast in the future, which presumably you will be, it will already have started. In which case, we hope you enjoyed. So, talking completely in blind ignorance of what's actually happened or will have going to have happened yet, actually. Some big names, couple of moves around, but I think it just promises to be another... I think unpredictable is probably the best way to describe Formula E for the best of times, isn't it? You can have somebody top of the pops one year and winning the championship and not seem to feature the next year, but also vice versa, which is something Formula One seems to be aspiring to anyway, so... I'm quite looking forward to it, and I think we're going to try and get up to one this year, aren't we? Because watching them around Docklands will probably be quite spectacular, I would have thought.
I think it was interesting to see. I went through the team lists and the number of manufacturers that are in there and have committed now long term to Formula E. I guess that's where they're going to develop their battery technologies far more so than they will in the hybrid, or far more quickly than they will in the hybrids that are in Formula One. That seems to be the way they want to go. But I mean, all the major players in the industry are there and pitching in. They're working with other teams, but I mean, Jaguar is Jaguar. And the other thing that did hearten me, because I remember interviewing him years ago, Sam Bird is still the driver in Formula E, and good lad, and been around a long time, and that seems to be where he's ended up, and he's still there after all these years. I think he's done every season. Good luck to him. Good luck to the rest of them.
It seems I think they've whether it's through luck or judgment or coincidence, the big name drivers that they've got in there, all the ex Formula One drivers or Formula One test drivers. It's I think there's a good mix of youthful enough but seeking other opportunities Formula One drivers and people that are regarded as should be in F1 if only there were 22, 24, 26, 28 seats available. I think that adds weight to the formula as a whole. You know, if a couple of washed up second-rate Formula One drivers went in and bossed the whole thing, then I don't think that'd be too good for the series. The fact that we've had some very, very good championship contending Formula One drivers go into Formula E and struggle or get shown up or be off the pace or whatever. Okay, it's a very different car, different driving style needed, but the fact that Formula One drivers make it look a bit tricky, I think is a good thing, really, and I think it adds weight to the talents that do shine out in there.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course, we've got hybrid technology now making its way into WRC as well, so you've got Ford, Toyota, Hyundai, and a particularly tricky, complicated hybrid system that gives you 3 seconds of boost, so you can use it to get your 0 to 60 bit off the bat, but then doesn't give you more power until you've braked enough that it can give you a bit more power on top, and it makes it from 400 and something to 500 something horsepower. So it's not an inconsiderable amount. So you're going to find drivers maybe braking hard into a corner so they have enough power to accelerate out when they don't actually need to brake. I can see the traditional drivers, maybe that's not going to work so well. I mean, we've seen one massive crash already with one of the new Pumas, which I think looks very cool. Thankfully, the crew all okay. But yeah, I mean, you've got some entirely different ways of driving, piloting a car there, but some traditionally brilliant drivers like Loeb out there showing everyone how it's done. I think it's going to be an interesting shift in the way that things are done, because you couldn't. I'm not sure that I can imagine the likes of Burns or maybe McRae braking unnecessarily. I'm not sure whether you're going to want to be flat out with your 400 brake, or whether you want to be braking to get 500 brake to get more power when you don't need to. It seems weird somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I think any driving technique that requires you to slow down more than is necessary certainly wouldn't have suited McRae, would it? That
No.
wasn't in his instinct, was it? It was flat out or nothing, and that was it. But it's probably a sign of the times we've got fewer and fewer different cars in the WRC. Although we've got a couple of different teams in inverted commas and liveries and things like that. It's broadly speaking, it's 3 cars now in the WRC, and that's it, isn't it? The Puma, the i20, and the Grrr, which is as I say, a sign of the times. But it's at least all of the manufacturer teams are fielding many drivers, 4 drivers each, 5 drivers each, if not. So it's at least it keeps the numbers up and keeps things interesting. You know, it's all too easy to fall into the trap of the British touring cars in the early and mid 2000s, wasn't it? Where it was basically a Vauxhall Astra or nothing, and that was it. And they ran 3 drivers, and it was between the 3 of them. But yeah, we're just being careful what we say, because Andrew actually hasn't seen the rally. He's saving it up to watch it at the weekend, so we're being slightly evasive as to the actual result of it. But it is well worth a watch, and it's a bit of deja vu and a bit of all new. So it's tune in.
Complicated is what it also is. Really complicated. I'm not sure whether I'm entirely on board with that. It'd be interesting to see whether you're better off going flat out with your 400 brake horsepower, or braking, or making the most of your braking at least, and getting your little boosts up to 500 brake horsepower. But really, really tricky bits of kit that I can't entirely get my head around. I'm not sure quite how the management system of this is going to work, whether it's going to be it gets unlocked. As far as I understand, it gets unlocked automatically and then gets deployed under full throttle. But yeah, confusing and exciting in equal measure. I think there was no question that the sport would have to have some form of hybrid powertrain, like everything else is at the moment. But I do think the impact of a few cars is tiny compared to the greater problem, and potentially we could probably do better to promote environmental issues rather than trying to constrict or developed the cars in such a way that it has the word hybrid hung on the side. I'm not sure that it really washes with me in terms of the eco credentials. When you have a 400 brake horsepower engine anyway, I think you're better off just having an engine and making it a bit more open so more people can join in and make it a bit more interesting, so it isn't a 3-car event, effectively. But that said, I suppose if you have the cars that are closer together in their performance, you get to see the difference in the drivers, don't you? So I guess it depends what you want to see, whether you want to see the development of the cars or the development of the drivers. For me, I've always been particularly interested in the cars themselves, but the characters are the drivers, aren't they? And it's always the drivers that speak at the end of the day and not the cars.
Absolutely.
Precisely so. You can't interview cars.
Well, there you go. I've tried. And on that final motorsport related note, I suppose it's time for us to end. Next week we're going to be talking about car programs, whether that be car restoration, car auction. What's your choice? Let us know on the socials. We are at UK Motor Talk everywhere, and on YouTube you can also see an update as to what I've been doing with the Onion. All kinds of things, all kinds of fluids. I leave that to you. In the meantime, from me, Mike, goodbye.
From me, Jim, it's goodbye.
And from me, Graham. Good night, everybody, and take good care.
UK Motor Talk, a First Take Media production.